Sphere. The Humanitarian Charter and Minimum Standards. Part 4. Shelter and Settlement. Essential concepts in shelter and settlement. 1. Planning. 2. Location and settlement planning. 3. Living space. 4. Household items. 5. Technical assistance. 6. Security of tenure. 7. Environmental sustainability. Essential concepts in shelter and settlement. 1. Everyone has the right to adequate housing. Shelters and settlements are interrelated and need to be considered as a whole. Shelter is the household living space, including the items necessary to support daily activities. Settlement is the wider locations where people and community live. Two shelter and settlement responses aim to provide a safe living environment. Timely shelter and settlements support can save lives in the initial stages of a crisis. In addition to providing protection from weather, shelter is necessary to promote health, support family and community life, and provide dignity, security, and access to livelihoods. Shelter and settlement response options are not limited to delivering hardware and materials or constructing a shelter. Response options also include providing support to secure land and obtain shelter, housing, or household items. This includes technical assistance and quality assurance, which can empower and mobilize an affected population to build back better and more safely. Knowing the national legal framework for land and property is essential. Three shelter and settlement responses in urban settings require specific expertise. Working in urban contexts requires expertise in urban planning and design and knowledge of rights, regulations, laws, and policies relating to housing, land and property. A strong understanding of local housing and financial markets is crucial. Be prepared to engage with civil society and the private sector. The private sector can play a role in delivering sustainable market-based solutions. The responses should build on local norms and services and avoid creating parallel structures. Developing a holistic response at settlement, neighborhood, or area level is more likely to provide a sustainable contribution to the well-being of affected populations in urban areas. For some groups are particularly vulnerable to undernutrition. Where and how affected people find shelter will vary depending on their ability to remain in place or their need to move away. A systematic consideration of the post-crisis context is the first step in planning options for shelter and settlement assistance. It is important to understand the different approaches that may be appropriate for people who are displaced, directly affected but not displaced, or indirectly affected. These minimum standards should not be applied in isolation. The right to adequate shelter is linked to the rights to water and sanitation, food and health. Progress in achieving the sphere minimum standards in one area influences progress in other areas. For a response to be effective, close coordination and collaboration are required with other sectors. Coordination with local authorities and other responding agencies helps ensure that needs are met, that efforts are not duplicated, and that the quality of food security and nutrition responses is optimized. International law specifically protects the right to adequate shelter. The right to access adequate housing is protected by international law. It is the right to live somewhere in security, peace, and dignity. This right contains freedoms such as the right to choose one's residence and entitlements such as security of tenure. It enshrines protection principles such as protection from forced eviction. States are obliged to ensure this right when individuals or groups, including refugees and internally displaced persons, are unable to access adequate housing, including in crises. Seven links to the protection principles and core humanitarian standard. Crises can worsen pre-existing inequalities. Therefore, it is important to offer impartial and context-sensitive assistance, in particular to those who have the least capacity to recover from a crisis by themselves. Aid workers should be trained on child safeguarding and know how to use referral systems for suspected cases of violence, abuse, or exploitation, including of children. Shelter and settlement standards. 1. Planning. Planning is crucial for optimal response outcomes at regional, national, agency or community levels. Understanding the pre- and post-crisis context allows an assessment of both the direct and the indirect impact of the crisis on people's living conditions and any social, economic, and political consequences. Identifying needs and then developing appropriate response options is the basis for a well-planned and coordinated shelter and settlement response. Shelter and Settlement Standard 1. Planning. Shelter and settlement interventions are well planned and coordinated to contribute to the safety and well-being of affected people and promote recovery. Key actions. 1. Work with the affected population as well as national and local authorities to assess the shelter and settlement needs and capacities. 2. Work with stakeholders to identify the most effective and appropriate assistance options and how to provide these. 3. Develop a shelter and settlement plan in coordination with relevant authorities and the affected communities. 4. Analyze available cooking resources and methods, including the type of stove and fuel and availability of pots and utensils. Location and settlement planning. Location and settlement planning should promote safe, acceptable, and accessible living spaces that offer access to basic services, livelihoods and opportunities to connect to a broader network. Shelter and Settlement Standard 2. Location and settlement planning. Shelters and settlements are located in safe and secure areas, offering adequate space and access to essential services and livelihoods. Key actions. 1. Work within existing planning processes and regulations and agree terms with host communities and relevant authorities. 2. Involve diverse stakeholders, including groups within the affected population, in site selection and settlement planning. 3. Ensure the affected population has access to essential services and facilities, including livelihoods opportunities. 4. Plan the use of land to provide sufficient space for all functions, accessibility to all shelters and services, and adequate safety measures throughout the settlement. 5. Include rainfall or flood water drainage planning in site selection and settlement development. Living space. Living space is very important for people's well-being. It is a core human need and right to have a place for a family to dwell, feel safe and perform a variety of essential domestic activities. Shelter and Settlement Standard 3. Living space. People have access to living spaces that are safe and adequate, enabling essential household and livelihoods activities to be undertaken with dignity. Key actions. 1. Ensure that each affected household has adequate living space to perform basic domestic activities. 2. Ensure that the space immediately surrounding the living space supports safe access to fundamental activities. 3. Promote the use of shelter solutions, construction techniques, and materials that are culturally and socially acceptable and environmentally sustainable. For household items. Household item assistance supports restoring and maintaining health, dignity, and safety and undertaking daily domestic activities in and around the home. This standard addresses items for sleeping, food preparation and storage, eating and drinking, thermal comfort, lighting, and personal clothing. The wash chapter gives additional detail about items such as bed nets, buckets, water storage, and hygiene items. Shelter and Settlement Standard 4. Household items. Household item assistance supports restoring and maintaining health, dignity, and safety and the undertaking of daily domestic activities in and around the home. Key actions. 1. Assess and ensure access to items that enable households to restore and maintain essential domestic activities. 2. Decide how to deliver the household item assistance effectively and appropriately. 3. Monitor the availability, quality, and use of household items, and adapt as needed. Five. Technical assistance. Technical assistance is an integral part of shelter and settlement responses. It supports the self-recovery of the affected people and improves the quality and safety of their shelter and settlement. It is essential that affected households or communities are actively involved in choosing their accommodation, the design of shelters, the site layout and materials, and in supervising or carrying out work to build the shelters and other construction. Shelter and Settlement Standard 5. Technical assistance. People have access to appropriate technical assistance in a timely manner. Key actions. 1. Understand the pre-crisis planning and building practices, available materials, expertise, and capacities. 2. Involve and support the affected people, local government, and local professionals in the building process. 3. Promote safer building practices to meet current shelter needs and reduce future risks. 4. Ensure that people have access to adequate technical assistance. 5. Establish appropriate project management of materials, finance, labor, technical assistance, and processes for regulatory approval requirements to ensure quality outcomes. Six. Security of tenure. Security of tenure means that people can live in their homes without fear of forced eviction, whether in communal settlement situations, informal settlements, host communities, or after return. It is the foundation of the right to adequate housing and many other human rights. In the humanitarian context, an incremental, or step-by-step, approach may be the most appropriate. This recognizes that displaced people can be supported to improve their living conditions in different types of accommodation. It does not mean prioritizing owners for assistance, nor does it necessarily convey permanence or ownership. Shelter and Settlement Standard 6. Security of tenure. The affected population has security of tenure in its shelter and settlement options. Key actions. 1. Undertake due diligence in program design and implementation. 2. Understand the legal framework and the reality on the ground. 3. Understand how tenure systems, arrangements, and practices affect security of tenure for at-risk groups. 4. Implement shelter and settlement programs to support security of tenure. 5. Support protection from forced eviction. 7. Environmental sustainability. Environmental sustainability addresses responsible programming that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. Ignoring environmental issues in the short term can compromise recovery, worsen existing problems, or cause new ones. Shelter and Settlement Standard 7. Environmental sustainability. Shelter and settlement assistance minimizes any negative program impact on the natural environment. Key actions. 1. Integrate environmental impact assessment and management in all shelter and settlement planning. 2. Select the most sustainable materials and techniques among the viable options. 3. Manage solid waste in a safe, timely, culturally sensitive, and environmentally sustainable way in all settlements. 4. Establish, restore, and promote safe, reliable, affordable, and environmentally sustainable energy supply systems. 5. Protect, restore, and improve the ecological value of operational sites, such as temporary settlements, during and after use.